Hey guys, quick announcement before the video starts. I just wanted to let you all know that I recently created a Twitter account for the channel. I plan to start posting on there very soon, so if you're interested, you can follow me at twitter.com/jittersval. I'll leave a link in the description. Anyways, that's all I had to say. Now let's get into the video. Hello, my name is Jitterz and welcome back for a brand new video. Today, I'm going to be talking about a topic that's been highly requested in my comments for a while now. And just like the title suggests, that topic is about the maps in Valorant, and specifically the less popular maps in the game. So unfortunately, unlike some of my other videos, there aren't really a lot of stats for a topic like this. There isn't somewhere I can just look to find what Valorant players' least favorite maps are. So this video is going to be mostly my opinion, and based off opinions of comments I see most often in the Valorant community. So if there's something I miss in this video, or that you disagree with, just please leave a comment letting me know. I always enjoy hearing what you guys have to say. But anyways, let's get into the video. When it comes to hated or disliked maps, the top 3 maps I feel like that are brought up the most are Bind, Breeze, and Icebox. I've recently been hearing this about Fracture as well, but I feel like the map is a little too new to add to this conversation right now. Players usually aren't fans of a map when it first comes out, since no one really knows how to play it. So maybe in a few months I can confidently add this map to this discussion, but for today I'm going to just be talking about those 3. Now I feel like with a conversation like this, it's a lot easier to look at good maps and what makes those maps so liked to better see what the more disliked maps are missing. The first point I wanted to talk about is that the more liked maps have a lot of options for where to hold on defense. Think of a map like Ascent, which is one of mine and I think a lot of players' favorite map. On A, you can play on Gen, on Dice, you can play on both sides of Hell, on the right side, and behind the wooden box on Heaven. You can play behind the wooden box on site, and you can try to cheese close right. And that's just on site. You can also play in tree, or try to push out with util and try to take angles in A main or even wine. Compare this with maps like Breeze and Bind. If you're playing B on Breeze, if you want to play on site, you can only really play backside, behind the pillar, or either close right or close left, which doesn't feel like very many options when you're trying to hold on site. And not to mention, because of how the map's designed, you can't really escape the site if you play in any of these positions. Unless you're someone like Jet, you're pretty much committed if you play in any of these spots. And yes, you can make that argument for Ascent too, but at least Ascent has a lot more angles to choose from. And honestly, Breeze isn't nearly as bad as Bind when it comes to this. You can't even really play on site on B. Since agents like Raze are so common on that map, you can't really play back site or you'll just die to a nade. Playing inside 2 puts you in a position where you need to worry about watching both sides, and enemies can just go over top of you and come out from behind you. You can't really play elbow or CT unless you're playing something like Sova or Cypher because they're always smoked off. So this leaves you with only a couple of options. Either play hookah or play in garden. Which also doesn't feel that great in solo queue because players really like to play safe and play in spots like CT and elbow, especially in the lower ranks. Which means that if you're long or hookah, it's very easy to get pinched as enemies push from the other side you're not holding. Another point that I think makes a map fun to play is how easy it is to retake. Of course, a retake is never easy, but it should still feel possible. Especially in something like a 2v2 or even a 1v2 situation if the enemy team isn't playing well together. The reason I think being easy to retake is so important is because a lot of the time in solo queue you're going to be retaking sites. And oftentimes you're going to be at a disadvantage. And I think if a site is too hard to retake, it lowers the impact a player can have. Because one player playing poorly and losing a site over and over again can cost you an entire defense half. Where if the site is fair on the retake difficulty, the game doesn't necessarily feel like an auto loss because of one player on defense. I think that the maps should be balanced in a way where teamwork is important, but a single player can also have the potential to solo carry and clutch rounds if they need to. Think of a map like Haven. A site is pretty hard to retake for sure, but with something like a Killjoy ult, it could be easy to do. But even without any ultimates, C site still feels alright to retake. It's possible to clear the site from CT pretty safely, and teams tend to plant for and play long on that site, which makes it feel like retaking a site, even in solo queue, is always possible. Again, compare that to maps like Bind and Icebox. I personally think that B site on Bind is one of, if not the hardest site to retake in the game. And if no one's coming from the flank, either from hookah or long, it feels almost impossible. And if your team gave up U-Haul control on A site, it can also feel just as hard sometimes to retake that site as well. On Icebox, B site can also be super annoying to retake if your team doesn't have something like a Viper retake wall. And even then, it isn't always easy since it can be easy to spam through and kill a diffuser. Players just play from yellow or B long, and there's barely any counterplay if your team is at a man disadvantage, or even if you have equal numbers sometimes. The retakes on some of these less popular maps are just way too difficult, especially in solo queue. requiring too much team coordination to make them feel consistent. The next point I wanted to talk about is arguably less important, but still something I think is worth talking about, which is that popular maps usually have multiple viable agents in solo queue in every role. Think about a map like Haven. You can play any Sentinel, Sage, Killjoy, and Cypher are all pretty viable. For controllers, you can also play pretty much all of them. Skye, Breach, and Sova are all playable on Haven. And for duelists, Jett is strong as always, but you can also play Phoenix, Raze, or even Reyna effectively. But on the less popular maps, there are usually a lot of must picks that limit the agent pool on them. Which means if you don't happen to have a player that can play those agents, you're put at a huge disadvantage. On Bind, you pretty much need a Raze to stay competitive with a team that has one. Breeze is completely unplayable without a Viper. And Icebox, although better after the recent Radiant box changes, requires Sage and her wall to plant on B. Maps like these make it hard for players that really enjoy playing a specific agent to always get their pick. If you love playing Phoenix, you can't really pick him when you see Breeze pop up. And if you love picking Cypher, you have to be a Sage main when you play on Icebox. Again, this might not be the biggest reason for why people don't like these maps, but I do think it's a factor. Finally, the last reason I think that some of these maps are so disliked is that these maps don't really have a lot of options for how you can play them, especially defensively. When it comes to a lot of these maps, you can't really do anything besides hold and wait for the enemy team to push you without it being kind of a throw. I'm thinking about maps like Breeze, where you can't really push out B main and take B main control, and I've literally never heard anyone say, hey, let's fight for cave control this round. It just doesn't happen. This is because of just how hard it is to really push these areas of the map, since there are multiple entrances. This is a similar situation on Icebox, where you can't really reliably push out on A because of how many angles the enemy team can pop out of because of belt. Of course, pro teams can do this, but they have a lot of practice getting it down where one player can hold down belt while the other tries to get a pick with the Op or Vandal. But in solo queue, it's not really that viable of a strategy because it just requires too much team coordination to pull off and is very inconsistent. Compare this again to a map like Haven, where if you're playing on A, yes you can play on site, but you can also push and try to get control of A lobby or just play for the A ult orb. Doing something like Sova darting A lobby and then having a Jett smoke off the doorway or the orb itself. You can do this and it isn't really considered throwing the way it is on a map like Icebox or Breeze. And I think the ability to have these different playstyles allows these maps to stay fresh and fun to play. Just to quickly conclude, I think that I've stated a lot of points in this video, but they all kind of revolve around two main ideas. And those ideas are that the difference between a good map and a bad map are the variety a map can have, whether that's a variety in playstyles or a variety in agent selection, and the amount of teamwork required to be able to play a map properly. With the less teamwork required, the more positive the reception generally is for that map. And I think that for any new maps to be well received by the Valorant community, they need to be able to fit into these criteria. Anyways, that's really all I had to say when it comes to some of the less popular maps in Valorant. Again, this video was mostly my opinion, so please leave a comment letting me know if you agree or disagree with anything I've said. Also, if you're interested, consider following me on Twitch at twitch.tv/JitterzVal. I stream every Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. EST. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more Valorant related content.